Welcome to the Animal Free Labcast, everyone. I'm back again today with Dr. Gemma Davis. Hey, Gemma, how are you?
Hi, Carla. I'm good, thank you. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm starting to feel quite festive. It's getting a bit chilly out there, isn't it?
Yeah, it has gone cold, isn't it? But yeah, it won't be long for Christmas.
Yeah. I know. Well, the lights are up. Not at our house, but everyone else's houses.
Yeah, same. It's a job I always put off for too long, but I need to get doing that because it takes ages to put all the decorations up, doesn't it? So
we're a bit bar humbug. We don't do it, but what we do is give people awards. We don't actually, just virtual awards in our heads for the most outrageous display. So there's some good ones around the house.
Yeah. I have to share some pictures with us.
So what have we got coming up today?
So today we're going to be joined by two very special guests. We have our Head of Science, Dr. Dobie, and we also have our Director of Public Affairs, Isobel Martin.
Brilliant. We've been keeping Ross under wraps. So Ross has been with us for a little while now. So welcome, Ross. You've been merrily working on some stuff behind the scenes, which we're going to be talking about next year. But welcome to the Animal Free Labcast, Ross.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be here finally.
Thanks for joining us. Yeah,
thank you. It's about time. And hello, Isobel. How are you doing? Welcome back.
Thank you. Hi there. Great to be joining you.
Nice to see you, Isobel. Thanks for joining.
Okay, so we're gonna be talking about the government strategy again, and getting Isobel and Ross to do a bit of a deep dive on what's in it and the next steps. But before we do that, last week's poll, Gemma, remind us what the question was.
Yeah, the question was, should the government strategy prioritise replacing animal experiments in cancer research? Yes or no? And unsurprisingly, really, 99% of people said yes. So there was a couple of people that disagreed, but yeah.
There's always a couple of people, isn't there?
There is, yeah. I wonder if it's always the same people or different. I don't know.
I think we should set a New Year's resolution to try and come up with more divisive, more controversial questions.
Yeah, we will. We'll work on that.
If people have got suggestions for questions we could ask, do let us know.
Send them in. Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, we'll have another one at the end of this episode. So we'll see if we can get a slightly different result from that. But let's talk with Ross and Isobel now then. So first question, Ross, what do you make of the government strategy? Is it good news? So I should say, obviously, the government strategy on phasing out animal testing. Good news? Bad news? What do you make of it, Ross?
I think it's a good question, and I think my answer really depends on how I'm looking at the strategy. So at its core, the strategy has two overarching objectives. One, to support the development of alternative approaches, which could replace animal use. And two, to phase out animal tests where validated and reliable alternatives exist. Now, as a strategy working to phase out the use of animals in science, I'd say it doesn't go far enough. Yes, it's a step in the right direction, but it falls short in several important areas, and many of which I'm sure Isobel will outline in more detail. Now, if I look at it instead as a strategy designed to phase in human-focused approaches, then I'm much more optimistic. I mean, there's a lot of really good stuff in there. I mean, the government shows that it understands the hurdles faced by scientists who are either already using these human-focused models or are looking to adopt them. And it highlights a number of objectives that could really help overcome these barriers. I mean, there's mention of increased funding, specific training. You've got efforts to make publishing of human-specific methods easier. And then there's the setting up of initiatives like the UK Centre for the Validation of Alternative Methods, or UCFAM, which could play a really key role in validating human-focused methods for regulatory decision-making. So, if these objectives, along with the others in the strategy, if they're implemented, then, this could provide real support for researchers. So yes, that is extremely good news.
And a lot of the measures that are in there are things that we've been calling for a long time, aren't they? So, that's good.
Absolutely.
We're pleased with that. Yeah,
absolutely. What I would sort of finish on is I would say I'm cautiously optimistic because these are still just promising words, aren't they? And I think it's really important that we now see the detail on how the government is going to turn the words into actions.
Thank you, Ross. All right, Isobel, over to you. What do you make of it? Good news? Cautiously
Thank you.
optimistic like Ross?
I think I very much I do align with Ross's thoughts there, but certainly I perhaps don't have quite the same level of optimism, and feel that there is a huge amount more that needs to be done, which is why it's so brilliant that we're all continuing to push for change here. So clearly, as we've all said, it is a very positive step in the right direction, but not ambitious enough to bring about meaningful change from my perspective. And obviously, we've all been rereading this over the past few weeks and mulling it over in a lot of depth. And I think as I've gone through that process, it's struck me a lot what Ross is actually saying there, which is really interesting, that there are some very positive measures in terms of phasing in, as it were, and promoting the non-animal methods. But where it's very weak and where it really falls down is on making sure that the animal tests are actually stopped, i.e. the phase out part of it. So if we're not careful, we'll sort of end up in a situation where, yes, there are positive initiatives to encourage the development of alternatives and to increase the take-up of those, but we could see a situation where animal tests are just continuing at the same time without those actually being replaced by the non-animal methods, and despite the availability of those continuing. So there are obviously, as Ross has outlined there are really positive steps in there, although, of course, there is still a lot of detail missing from these and a lot of work to be done on implementing those. And of course, we are extremely glad to see that there is a mention of phasing out specific tests. But obviously, since the strategy has been published, as we've all been analysing closely and also engaging with MPs who have asked parliamentary questions to get more information about the tests that are planned to be phased out, it's become clear that the impact of these is actually very limited. So the focus is often on areas where the number of experiments has been very low in recent years anyway, so very much the low-hanging fruit. So just one example is it mentions phasing out a test called the rabbit pyrogen test by the end of this year, but it hasn't been reported since 2018 anyway. Again, it mentions ending skin irritation testing by the end of next year, but no procedures were actually reported for that last year, which is the latest data we have. And there are some really obvious omissions from that list as well, and missed opportunities, such as allowing licenses for the forced swim test to continue being issued until the end of the Parliament, and failing to phase out the LD50 test. And then, of course, there is the perhaps biggest omission of all, is failing to set any timeline for the overall phase out of animal experiments. That is obviously just so important to drive the progress. So I do share some optimism, but still a lot of work to be done and really falling short.
So would it be fair to say then, I think what I heard both of you saying is this is quite good in terms of phasing in the alternatives, phasing in animal free, and not so good at phasing out and ending animal research?
Exactly.
Absolutely. That would be my take on it.
They called it phasing out animal testing faster. They could have called it phasing in alternatives faster. Maybe, there you go, top tip for next time. Needs a rebrand. So behind the scenes then, we have been looking at the next steps for us as an organisation. What are we calling for, having had time now to digest the strategy a little bit more? And we've come up with 4 priorities. So I thought it'd be really great if the 3 of you, our experts in the room, could go through what these 4 priorities are. And people listening, you might have seen this on our social media or in our emails. We're sort of starting to talk about these. But I wanted Isobel, Ross and Gemma just to talk through them in a little bit more detail. So if that's all right, Isobel, we'll kick off with you to talk about the first one.
Thank you. So the first key priority is to get the strategy enshrined into law. So as we've spoken about, there are some welcome commitments in the strategy. Clearly, it's only a starting point, though. So to get closer to turning the sort of ambitions into proper change, we really need some crucial things. So particularly a clear timeline, firm target, and legally binding requirements. And of course, listeners to the podcast will already know that this is something that Herbie's law would provide, which I know you already have supported and know a lot about. So what we're calling on the government to do is, first of all, to strengthen the commitments and targets within the strategy, and then to put these into law so that progress becomes a legal obligation, not just a sort of a set of aspiration. And crucially, to make sure that long-term change continues regardless of political shifts, like changes of government in the future.
Yeah.
And of course, this is an approach that has been taken in other areas, such as in the area of climate change, for example, with the Climate Change Act. And of course, Herbie's Law is a really important element of that. And to recap, as you'll know, what that would do is set a goal of phasing out animal experiments in medical research over the next decade, but crucially working collaboratively with scientists to support them with that transition. So what we are calling for is a new law that is, of course, Herbie's Law, but also incorporate the positive elements that we have got in the government strategy to make sure that those are locked in and given their statutory footing.
Fabulous. Thank you, Isobel. So if anyone wants some more information or would like to kind of understand that a little bit more, again, you'll be getting emails from us about this, but please do feel free to reach out to us on the email or on our phone, and Gemma will give the details later in the episode, and you can ask us questions and we'll come back to you about that. Ross, over to you for the next of our key priorities.
Yes, so I'm going to focus on replacing the use of animal-derived antibodies, which it's actually been a big priority of the charity for a few years now. And during this time, we've been working closely with scientists to support that transition away from animal-derived antibodies towards alternatives that are not only more ethical, but they're also scientifically superior. So almost, I think, exactly a year ago, we launched our recombinant antibodies mimetics database. And this is a really cool resource that connects researcher.
I was going to ask you what it was, because it's a bit of a mouthful, that, isn't it? Recombinant antibodies and mimetics
database. Yes.
Yeah.
So what it does is it connects researchers with tens of thousands of commercially available recombinant antibodies and mimetics. So these affinity reagents, both recombinant antibodies and mimetics, they can be produced entirely without the use of animals. And they offer all the benefits of traditional animal-derived antibodies, but without the associated scientific problems. So I'm talking about things like unreliable specificity and batch-to-batch variation. So it's genuinely a win-win. We're talking about reagents that are more ethical and they're more reliable. And so all that said, I think, unfortunately, right now it's estimated that these reagents only make up less than 5% of the reagents used in research, and that's simply not good enough, and it needs to change. So it was therefore great to see in the strategy that the government agrees, and they've actually set a target to phase out the use of animal-derived polyclonal antibodies by 2030. And it's really nice to see in the strategy that they specifically highlight recombinant antibodies and mimetics as both suitable and superior alternatives. And the strategy goes on, it points out that one of the main barriers to adoption is lack of awareness and education around these important alternatives. And to be honest, we couldn't agree more. It's exactly why we built the database, to raise awareness and to make these tools easy to find. And also just to give researchers a place to learn about how they're made and why they're better. And the database actually includes a whole knowledge hub dedicated just to that. So taken together, I believe that we're ideally positioned and we're ready to support the government in reaching that target.
So obviously this is a really important area of research, and but it's one of those things that people probably don't know as much about. Certainly I don't. So can you just sort of tell us in really simple terms why antibodies are used? I mean, we'll all have heard of them through COVID, but why are antibodies used, and why is it important to have animal-free ones or recombinant mimetics?
Absolutely. So antibodies are a really essential research tool. So they're used in so many different ways. And that's because they have this really lovely ability to specifically bind to a target. So that could be a virus, it could be a protein. So that allows you to detect it and possibly to block certain pathways as well. So if I talk a little bit about my experience before I joined the charity, what we found is certain cells express a protein that are not expressed in any other cell. what an antibody allows us to do is to detect that protein on that cell and therefore map that cell. So we were using these really amazing imaging techniques, using antibodies to specifically identify particular cells, labeling them with a fluorescent tag, and then we'd look under a microscope and we'd have this fantastic map of all the different cells and where they sit in a tissue. And that becomes really interesting because when you're looking at drug responses, you can see how the cells behave differently, how they move, if you've got more, if you've got less. And that's just one example of what proteins can do. They can show where cells are, they can show where proteins are in terms of location. You can look at if proteins and things are going up and down, and that's all really important when you're looking at what they're doing during disease and trying to find possible therapeutics.
So they're really important, but a lot of them have involved the use of animals in their making or their production or that sort of thing. And so we're encouraging people to use ones that have got really fancy names, recombinant and mimetics.
Recombinant antibodies, absolutely. And I think it is obviously, from the ethical side, we should be moving away from the use of animals, but actually also these traditional animal-derived antibodies, they have scientific problems. So they suffer from batch-to-batch variation. So depending on what batch you're using, they could be slightly different. And that makes reproducibility really challenging. And also they have problems with specificity. So they might end up binding to the wrong target. Now, antibodies are very unique and they're amazing because they bind to specific targets. If you get one that's binding to something that's wrong, that's really throwing off your science. So it's important that we have the best products that are the most specific to their target, and you don't have that batch-to-batch variability. And that's something that you can get with recombinant antibodies and mimetics.
So antibodies clearly really important. If people want to find out a little bit more about them, Gemma and I did do a podcast with Dr. Stephanie Modi a couple of months ago now, probably back in the autumn. So there's a whole episode that you can hear her talking about the database that she developed over the last year. And we think it's going to be a really important resource for researchers moving forward. And we really hope that the government will pick it up and promote it and use it as a resource to help researchers to transition away from animal-derived antibodies. All right, so our next one, we're going back to Isobel for. So Isobel, number 3 of our 4 priorities.
Thank you. So another really important thing from our perspective is making sure that parliamentarians, so MPs and peers, have a seat at the table in terms of making sure that the strategy is improved on and implemented. So one thing that's mentioned in the strategy is the formation of a sort of cross-government ministerial committee. So it's going to be chaired by the science minister. And what we think is really important is that the all-party parliamentary group on phasing out animal experiments that we support and help to run, that's included as part of the process. So we think that their input could be so valuable because obviously they bring this cross-party insight. There are MPs of all parties in there. And they also have really important links, of course, with their constituents, members of the public, but expert scientists as well. So they'll be able to draw on that.
Well, hopefully they will listen to us with that. I think we're writing to the minister to suggest this, aren't we?
Absolutely.
So we'll update listeners on progress with those 3. And with the 4th, actually. So Gemma, over to you, the 4th one.
Yeah, well, the last one kind of touches on, a lot of the other points, and it's about asking the government to provide clarity and transparency about everything that's been laid out in the strategy. Like we've said, we've kind of gone through the strategy document in a lot of detail, and we've come back with a lot of questions, things that, as much as they sound like a great idea at that top level, we do need to have that detail. And it's really important that that is available to the public and scientists and everybody involved to make sure that, the progress on this can be effectively monitored, the strategy can be implemented properly, and where improvements need to be made, then they can be as well. So there's lots of areas that we need clarity on, things like the investment, how much we know there is 75 million that's been put towards this, but we need to know exactly how that's going to be split. What's that going to look like in detail? Who's going to be eligible for that funding? Things like the proposed translational hub, which is it's an institute that's going to combine things like AI and cell engineering, genomics, advanced disease modelling, how is that going to be developed? Who's going to be leading it? How's that going to work with existing researchers? Another thing that we thought was really great that we saw in the strategy was that there will be training for early career researchers and PhD students, but we've got a lot of questions about who's going to give that training, what will it actually cover, how in depth will it be, what difference will that make? And also the other point that we talked about last time, I think, about the addressing animal methods bias in journals. So when papers go to be published, there is a lot of barriers about publishing data that doesn't contain results from animal experiments. So that is something that was specifically called out in the strategy. But again, how do you do that? How is it really going to change? Because a lot of that is based on people's opinions. So it'd be really interesting to get a bit more information on that. So kind of we are just calling on the government. As Isobel mentioned, we've supported a lot of parliamentary questions and we are getting some answers through that we're starting to get a bit more detail. So we're just kind of going to continue pushing for more detail.
And we'll be letting listeners at home and our supporters, as and when we get any kind of significant updates and more information. It's really going to be really important because, as we've been saying, there's some good measures in there, but they're quite woolly. Need a lot more detail. Devil will be in the detail, but we will be holding the government to account to make sure that it implements what it said it will do, and we will carry on pushing for it to go further. You haven't seen the last of Herbie's law. I just wanted to share some incredible news and say thank you so much to everyone at home. We found out, I think today, that every single MP has now been contacted by our amazing supporters. That's 650 MPs have been contacted.
Yeah.
So huge thank you. And well done. That's incredible. We've really got such a strong voice in Parliament now. And that is completely down to our supporters. So thank you. Thank you so much, because it really, really makes a difference, doesn't it, Isobel?
It absolutely does. We're absolutely overwhelmed by that. It was incredible. So yeah, just a huge thank you.
Especially when you think, we are a small charity. We're not one of these big ones that we don't have TV adverts. We don't have charity shops. We're not on the high street. We're small. A lot of people haven't heard of us. So to have reached every single MP in the country is amazing. Thank you so much. A huge thank you to Isobel and to Ross for joining me and Gemma on the episode today, and to all of our 3 experts for telling us about what's in the strategy and what we're asking for next. That's all we've got time for today, but we will be back in the new year telling you more about the strategy, and as we get these answers from the government, we'll keep you updated. We will be back in a fortnight with the special best bits and bloopers from the year. To see your festivities start off. I managed to do one today, so there's been hundreds that we've carefully edited out that you've never seen. So that'll be one to look forward to. But before we go, Gemma, as is the tradition, what's this week's poll question?
Yeah, so based on everything we've just talked about, the question is, do you support our 4 campaign asks to implement the government's new strategy to replace animal testing? Yes or no? And as always, you can vote on X, LinkedIn, Facebook and Instagram, and we'll tell you the results in the next episode. But if you'd like to get in touch and tell us your thoughts about the episode or anything else, then please do drop us an email at hello@animalfreeresearchuk.org.
And please do use that email address as well if you've got any questions about our response to the strategy.
Yeah.
Gemma, can you just say the question one more time?
Yep, it's, do you support our 4 campaign asks to implement the government's new strategy to replace animal testing? Yes or no?
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for joining me. Thank you for listening, and see you in a fortnight with our best bits and bloopers. Bye for now.